Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived in my house for over 20 years now. It's nothing too fancy, just a regular two-story home in a quiet neighborhood. I bought it when I was in my late 20s and have been happily living here ever since. About 5 years ago, the neighborhood decided to start up a homeowners association. I didn't really have strong feelings either way about it at the time. I figured it might be nice to have some organized community events and make sure people take care of their homes. Boy, was I wrong. The Homeowners Association's board ended up being run by a bunch of busybodies who suddenly felt like they could tell everyone what to do. At first, it started off small. We got notices about rules for lawn care, holiday decorations, paint colors. Annoying, but nothing too horrible. Then they started handing out violations and fines left and right over the most ridiculous things. One woman on the board was the absolute worst of them all. Let's call her Karen because she was basically a walking stereotype. She was constantly looking for violations to whine about. My perfectly manicured lawn wasn't up to her standards. My wind chimes on the front porch were unsightly clutter. God forbid a weed dared pop up or some paint chipped. Karen would send a snotty notice threatening fines if I didn't comply with her demands. I started avoiding her as much as I could. Luckily, our house weren't too close together. I tried to just focus on my own property and not cause issues. But Karen managed to provoke me even without contact. One nice Saturday afternoon, I was sitting out on my front porch enjoying the sunshine. Out of nowhere, a police cruiser pulls up in front of my house. I watched curiously as the officer got out and walked up to me. "Afternoon, sir. We received a complaint call claiming you've been spying on a neighbor from your porch without consent. Would you happen to know anything about that?" I was completely baffled. I literally sat on my porch occasionally. How in the world was that spying on anyone? The officer gave me Karen's address. Yep, sure enough, the complaint came from her. I politely explained to the cop that I simply sit out on my own front porch occasionally. I'm not spying or peering into anyone's home. The officer seemed to understand and said he had to respond to the call, but it didn't seem like an issue to him. He left after taking my statement. A few days later, I received a letter from a lawyer representing Karen. She was threatening to sue me if I didn't stop invading her privacy and stalking her from my porch. The letter went on about how I leered at her home for hours and how distressing it was for her. She wanted me to sign an agreement forbidding me from sitting on my front porch or face legal action. I couldn't believe this nonsense. There was no way I was signing anything admitting to absurd accusations. I hadn't done anything illegal or improper by simply sitting on my own property. I decided it was time to fight back legally against Karen's harassment. I did some research and dug up some very interesting facts. When our neighborhood was first constructed, the properties were actually all part of one large estate. The original owner had sold off parcels of land to various buyers over the decades. I discovered that I owned the original main house of the estate. A portion of what was now Karen's property had once been part of the main estate lands. This meant that legally I was technically the rightful landlord for the entire neighborhood. An obscure clause gave me certain authority as the original estate owner. I met with my lawyer and had him draft up the proper legal documents asserting my rights. The next Homeowners Association's board meeting, I showed up unannounced. You should have seen the look on Karen's face when I slapped the document down, declaring myself the rightful landlord. The other board members were caught completely off guard. I calmly explained the legal situation. Since their little homeowners associations was formed within my lands, I had the authority to dissolve it if I wished, but I proposed a compromise instead. The homeowners associations could continue existing if they agreed to vote Karen off the board, abolish all of her absurd rules and fines, and stop harassing me. Karen's face was red with anger. She started sputtering about suing me. I politely slid over a copy of the lawsuit I had already filed against both her and the Homeowners Association's board for harassment. That shut her up quick. The other board members had no choice but to concede to my terms. None of them wanted to get caught up in an expensive legal battle. Karen stormed off screaming. I left the meeting feeling very satisfied. Over the next few weeks, wonderful changes came to the neighborhood. All of Karen's petty rules were revoked. People could live freely without threats of fines over ridiculous things. Karen even withdrew her lawsuit against me, knowing she didn't have a leg to stand on. I go out of my way now to sit on my front porch frequently. I make sure to smile and wave politely at Karen whenever I see her. The look of impotent rage on her face is absolutely priceless. She can't do a thing about me enjoying my own property. I still have the legal authority to disband the homeowners associations completely if I wished, but they've been behaving themselves properly since being freed from Karen's tyranny. If that changes, I won't hesitate to threaten legal action again. The moral of the story is don't mess with someone who knows their legal rights. Karen found out the hard way that she picked on the wrong homeowner to harass. Her abuse of power blew up right in her face when she came against the rightful landlord. It just goes to show karma has its way of catching up with people like her eventually. After months of putting up with her petty harassment, it felt incredible to finally put her in her place for good. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened last night, and I am now in a good enough spot to actually post this. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I am a professional driver. As such, on the roads in the US, there are different truck stops throughout the country that have a pay-to-park system, usually about 10-20% of the lot marked off as reserved, with each space running from $15 to $25. The truck stop where this took place had parking for $17, which is relatively cheap for a guaranteed spot. The spots are reserved for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time and extending to 3 p.m. the following afternoon. I knew that I would have a late-night delivery, so I came to the truck stop around 3:30 and paid for a reserved spot. I told the manager on duty that I had a delivery up the road that night and would be back once the delivery was completed, but should still be able to clear out the spot by the next afternoon, today. She told me that this was okay and she would mark the spot as sold when I left. That way, if someone else comes in trying to reserve that spot, she could consult her notes and deny the sale. 11:15 p.m. rolls around, and I take off for my delivery. I don't get out of that facility until 2:30 a.m. the next morning, this morning. So I groggily drive back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid-for spot, only to find that the reserved parking spaces are all full. I call the manager on duty, and after giving her my info, I inform her that all the spots are full and that someone has parked in a spot and hasn't paid for it. She sends her other employee out to start checking trucks. The culprit was from a company that is known for their bright orange trailers, and he was a company driver. The other employee starts banging on his door to inform him that he is parked illegally and he has to move. Meanwhile, I can see the commotion from my mirror, with my vantage point in the fuel island, where I had been instructed to temporarily park. The driver answers the door with a bottle of Heineken in one hand and some sort of smoking implement in another. I know what it is, but for the sake of the mods, I'm not going to say it. I decided to roll down the window to hear the commotion, and I hear the employee tell the driver to either move, or he will get the towing company and police involved. This driver is flat out irate that someone had the audacity to tell him where he can and cannot park, so he slams the door on the employee, threatening him. The employee calls the police and tow company, and the police show up first. I had worked for this company before, so I know their policies, and more importantly, what they can and cannot have in their trucks. Alcoholic beverages are not allowed in the cab. Anything that isn't a cigarette or a cigar and a lighter is also not allowed. The coup de grace, a pew-pew of any kind, is absolutely not allowed, and especially not loaded. This driver had all that and some other not-so-legal substances in his cab, so he was hauled away in cuffs. His truck was hauled away on a wrecker. I made a call after the commotion died down to the company safety director and informed them that their rig will be in an impound lot, and their driver is going to jail over the not-so-legal stuff he had in his truck. She thanked me and said that he will definitely lose his job, especially over the alcohol and the other not-so-legal stuff. I guess he played the screw-around-and-find-out card, and it bit him in his career. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a long time ago when I was studying abroad. Mid-90 ES, so as a student I had a girlfriend at university. We both came from different countries to study in London. Just before the Christmas holiday, we agreed that I would fly over to her country and spend a week together, since her parents were gone for the week. As soon as I arrived, I noticed she was very distant towards me. I felt very unwelcome, but her friends were nice to me. Okay, I get it. You have not seen your friends in months, fine. But after a few days, I addressed this feeling I had, and she told me that it would be better to just be friends. After that, I felt like extra luggage and decided to fly home on an earlier flight 2 days later. After I got home, she called to ask if I had seen her debit card. She could not find it, and needed it to get some cash. Yes, in those days, cash was still the standard. No apps or smartphone or online banking yet. So I go through my pockets and find it in the pocket of a jacket I wore when we went clubbing. She told me that she could not wait until we would see each other a week later in London and asked me to send it by mail. So I obliged, but not before I left it on a very strong magnet for the rest of the evening. In those days, the cards worked with a magnetic strip, not with a chip like nowadays. A couple of days later, she called to say it did not work anymore, and it was a problem because banks were closed for the weekend. I acted totally surprised and said that the postal sorting machines must have had some magnetic technology. It ruined the rest of her holiday, too. As an adult, I find it a bit childish of me now, but man, it gave me a good feeling of payback back then. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in 2010, I moved out of my folks' place to a neighboring town and got my first real job working for the Hamburger Emperor. About halfway through my 11-month stay, working only in the kitchen, we had a semi-surprise manager, aka Big Boss, visit. It was about an hour's drive, so we were informed they were on the way. This was a very small town, and on most days I would ask my roommate to drop me off, or I would simply walk the 30 minutes it took to get from one end of the town to the other. A little foreshadowing happening. On the day of note, I had been dropped off for my shift around noon, as I was usually scheduled for lunch rushes. After working for about 2 hours, the news came in, and suddenly nothing was clean or good enough. Now, I've heard fast food health inspection horror stories, and I have none of my own. We kept a clean ship. Lower management, hereby Little Boss, was just looking for anything and everything, and in their triggered state, they weren't afraid to split hairs. And in my case, hair was their primary focus. See, my adolescent hormones had the audacity of finally mustering up enough facial hair at 19 that one could reasonably call it a 5 o'clock shadow, without being completely laughed out of the room. Knowing full well my ride situation, but obviously not thinking about it, Little Boss requested that I go home to shave and come back. I said yes, sir, and off I went on foot. After walking home for about 15 minutes, I texted my roommate, who promptly picked me up. I shaved, we got lunch, and then we drove around another 40 minutes while I was on the clock, doing dumb college kid stuff. After about 90 minutes to 2 hours, my roommate dropped me off a block away and I walked back in. Little Boss was pissed, flying around trying to make everything look seamless while being scrutinized by Big Boss. None of my peers noticed much. They were all keeping their noses down as to not be singled out and made an example of for Little Boss to save face and look good. You know how these things go? With all eyes on us, Little Boss just started laying into me. I wasn't 100% confident here or even remotely cocky. I just calmly stated it's a 30-minute walk both ways, and I was prioritizing having to shave. Big Boss asked Little Boss what's up, inquiring towards the situation at hand. Before turning away, Little Boss mumbled something to me about how I need to be more upfront about things and can't just take off for 2 hours without telling anyone. They both went into the tiny office and I never heard about it again. With the high turnover rate these places have a reputation for, there were only a couple of people left who even remembered. Big Boss is the one who got me the job. The next one is an entitled people story. A few years ago, I worked in a fast food restaurant. One day I brought dinner to a table in the restaurant's garden where an older woman and her grandson were sitting. During a brief conversation with the woman about their order, the kid, who was around 4 or 5, reached for a cup containing hot water. He poured it all over himself and started crying and screaming. I went inside to get some towels, not knowing it was the cup with hot water. I thought he had taken his drink, which was iced tea. When I returned, the child's mother was there, trying to remove her son's clothes and screaming, demanding compensation. She didn't know what had happened. Her child was screaming in pain, and she could only think of the money she could get from the situation. Panicking, I went back inside to inform the manager and to ask her to call an ambulance. They arrived and took the child to the hospital. However, this was just the beginning. The mother, hoping to gain something from the situation, decided to do so at all costs. Seeing her behavior when she screamed about compensation while her child was in pain, I was afraid she would blame me for the incident. Fortunately, the only camera in the garden recorded everything in full HD, showing that I wasn't at fault. The problem was that the child's mother and grandmother hadn't paid enough attention to what he was doing. Unaware of the cameras, the mother decided to lie about what happened. First, she told the restaurant's manager that I had poured the water on her son and that she had witnessed it. But she had been buying more food at the time and wasn't in the garden, as everyone could confirm. She then changed her story, claiming that I assured her the water was cold, even though I hadn't spoken to her, as she wasn't at the table. Confronted with this fact, she made up another version, claiming the cup had no lid. However, security camera footage showed otherwise. She then claimed she hadn't ordered any hot drinks, but the receipt proved she was lying again. The mother was furious that she couldn't convince the manager that she and her son were victims of the fast food employees. The saga continued the next day when she returned, upset that no one from the restaurant had called the hospital to inquire about her son's health. She informed everyone that her son had several second-degree burns due to the incident. The main manager, already briefed on the incident, knew what he was dealing with. The mother demanded my firing, threatened police reports and legal action, and even emailed the corporate office. However, all evidence was against her, and the corporate lawyers assured us there would be no legal consequences, as it was clear she couldn't accuse us of harming her child. I worked there only during the holidays, so I left about a month after the incident and returned the following holiday season. 2 years later, the manager informed me that the mother had finally given up trying to get compensation, as every attempt was unsuccessful. The security camera footage clearly showed what had happened, and none of the employees involved were called to the police station or court. The petty aspect of the situation was that the restaurant would have willingly paid for the boy's treatment, but they decided against it after the mother's accusations against me and other employees. She ended up with nothing but hatred and medical bills. I feel sorry for the boy who suffered so much, especially since his mother seemed more focused on profit than his well-being. The next one is an entitled parent story. It happened around a year ago, and I decided to share it here since I don't have much to do. I used to be an English teacher at a large English school here in Brazil. We have a lot of language schools around the country. I taught all ages, but my favorite to work with were the children. Around March last year, I got a group of 8-year-old children who were really delightful. Except for this one, let's call her Sid, because she actually reminded me of the sloth from Ice Age. Sid was a terrible student. She did enjoy the games and extra activities, but whenever I tried to assign an activity from the book, she'd make it a nightmare because she wouldn't do anything and then complain about it the whole class. Note: their activities were basically connect the word to the picture or color the objects that are toys, something like that. They didn't have to write anything, but Sid would still not do that. The school had training for teachers, and we were advised to keep a policy in the classroom to help students behave. My friend taught me the strategy of the well-behaved hangman. I'd draw a hangman game for each student, and each time they'd interrupt me, get up from their seats without permission, or stop doing an activity, they would get a part of the body. If the man was hung, they'd lose, and I'd call their parents to discuss their agitation. This group was particularly passionate about the line to leave class, so the one with fewer body parts would be the first, and the rest would follow the score. So Sid always wanted to be the first. It didn't matter how many times I told her the rules. She'd even cry about it sometimes, resulting in another body part on her hangman. I called her mom numerous times because she was not taught limits. The conversation would go like this: Karen, she's a child. She wants to be the first. Me, well, all of them want to be the first in line. Karen, she clearly wants more than the others, isn't that clear? Me, I need to be fair to all the kids. If I promise something, I cannot lie to them and let someone else be in front of them just because they want to. I didn't bring up they also behaved better, so they deserve it more than her argument because it was a private school and my coordinator and principal were specifically rigorous with teachers who would displease parents because there was a chance they'd take their children out of school. You are paid to teach English, not good manners, they'd say, so they go to mid-year vacation, and when they come back, I'm still with Sid's group. She now arrives late every single class because her mother enrolled her in piano lessons. Being late became a restriction in the well-behaved hangman, because out of the 8 students, 4 used to arrive late. It worked well for the other children. They talked to their parents about it, and they talked to me. I told them, I only have 60 minutes to teach them, and it becomes a problem when I have to wait 10 minutes before I start. It makes our time short. Besides, If I start before they arrive, it becomes a problem for me because they want to socialize a bit before we get going. They all understood it, except Karen. After a few weeks, Sid was crying over being the first in line again, and I get a call from Karen. Karen, I heard you've been punishing my daughter for being late. Me, it's a rule we agreed to keep class in order. She's not the only one who gets negative points for that. Karen, she needs to be late. She has piano lessons before the English class. Me, I'm sorry, but it would be a problem if I just let her go while adding body parts to the others. Karen said she'd asked the babysitter to take Sid out of piano lessons a few minutes early, and you might think that she was reasonable here, but she was not. I get a call from my coordinator asking me to go to his room for a second. See, so I just got a call from a mother asking if this is an English school or a reformatory. Care to explain? Me, I'm sorry, what? See, Sid's mom called and said you've been punishing her behavior in class. For God's sake, it was just a freaking line to leave class. She made it sound like I was straight out locking her daughter in an Iron Maiden. Me, well, I'm not punishing her. I'm rewarding others' behavior, and she's sad about it. See, it doesn't matter. I told you your duty is to teach English. Me, how can I teach English if the children don't behave in class? See, do your job. Don't mind those who are not paying attention. I didn't reply anymore because we had arguments before. I'd been there for 5 years already, and I knew he would make up any excuse to make me the one to blame for the situation, instead of just telling Karen it was the best thing to do. He told me not to play well-behaved hangman anymore, so I decided to play another game based on correct answers they'd give me to questions. Needless to say, Sid was not the best at that too. Karen would complain all the rest of the semester about it, and my coordinator couldn't do anything but didn't argue with her because Karen was an important woman in our city. Karen's complaints ended up getting me fired from the school in December. My coordinator said he was not able to put up with all those problems anymore. Later this year, I had to sue the school for not paying me the dismissal correctly, and I won. So this was kind of a happy ending, but I miss having a job. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.